4, 3, 2, 1.
Hello, my name is Timothy Phillips, and I am the founder of the Information Security Leadership Forum, and also, again, the privilege of being your facilitator for this second session of our ISO 27001 webinar series. So thank you very much for taking the time to join us. And so during this session, we're going to be covering a bit of an introduction to the interrelationship between the gap impact assessments and the mitigation plan. We're going to give a bit of definition of what a gap assessment is. We're going to talk about the difference between a self versus an independent third-party assessment. And then we're going to talk a little bit about some of the differences between gap assessment tools versus automated versus manual type tools, and some of the activity flow in the gap assessment. Then we're going to kind of flow over to the impact assessment. And from there, we're going to be talking a bit about the interrelationship of people, process, and technology and their considerations. So we're going to start with just a process view of the different activities. And I'm just going to kind of go over this really quickly. On the left side, these are prerequisite activities. So we have a defined methodology, a very structured one that we follow when we're teaching our ISO 27000 lead implementer course, or in my consulting practice when we're helping clients out. And really, that's where all these models have come from. And so the prerequisites aside, when you look at the activity here, we're going to start with performing the gap assessment. And this is essentially, in a nutshell, the control that we're looking for. Is it there or is it not? If you want to take the next level approach, which I recommend in my consulting practice, is we also suggest doing an assessment from a capability maturity modeling perspective. You can create your own CMM. We have created one using the established requirements under ISO 27001. So rating you so you have a better understanding using this CMM model as to how ready are you for the certification auditors to come in the door. And once the gap assessment has been performed, that's when essentially you're going for and starting to look at the impact of what that's going to take. And we look at that from we do a risk assessment, and then we do the impact assessment from a people, process, and technology perspective. And from there, we move that data over to understand kind of how does it fit together. And we end up creating what is referred to as a mitigation plan that becomes something that is risk prioritized activities. So which of your gaps that you have are creating more risk for you? And obviously it just makes sense. The higher the risk, let's put those up front and let's knock those ones out first, so that as time passes, most amount of the highest risk that you have been kind of put to rest. So what is a gap assessment? So a gap assessment is a systematic review of an organization's existing operational practices compared against the specifications of a standard, legislation, or legal obligation. So to refine that a little bit more, what is an ISMS gap assessment? Essentially, it's the same thing, only we're applying it to the ISO 27001 controls, clauses 4 through 10, Annex A, and it has to be augmented with anything in addition that you've identified during your legal and regulatory review. That was one of the prerequisite activities that relates to data protection. So, and there's two different ways you can do it. You can do it as a self-assessment and assumes that you have qualified expertise internally by all persons participating in that self-assessment, or you'll go out and utilize an independent third party. The great thing about an independent third party is you get objectivity. So, self-assessment versus independent third party. So we put this little chart together to kind of put it all together. So we'll go with the self-assessment. We'll go across that row. So the self-assessment, so it's performed internal to an organization by existing personnel. On the pro side, low to no cost to perform. It's not obviously not no cost because you're still paying for those people to do their job internally, and can typically get an assessment completed quicker because there's less scheduling and other things that are going on, and limits exposure of the security weaknesses that are identified to inside your organization. You haven't had somebody outside your organization that now knows about them. On the con side, there's the internal resources will carry a bias, whether somebody's ready to or willing to admit to that or not. It's a reality. If I've implemented, I might be a bit defensive and I might want to embellish a little bit. And so that it does tend to result in embellishment around the strength or existence of a control implementation. And it tends to yield unreliable or inaccurate findings. So it really is driven based on the level of expertise. If you don't have ISO certified and trained and certified people, then even if they're information security practitioners, they may still not know what ISO requires of that particular control. So you may get some inaccuracies and creates a false sense of compliance. So best utilized after an ISMS fully implemented. The one thing that I will suggest is in my consulting practice and over the years, I've been using the standard since 1997, back in my IBM days. And one of the things that I have noticed is anytime I've gone into an organization and they will self-declare the level of their compliance. A lot of internal or self-assessments that have been performed, I typically find organizations declaring they're somewhere between 70 to 90% on average. They're all saying they're about 80% compliant. However, after you have an experienced practitioner who is trained and certified in ISO 27001, goes in and does that same assessment, on average, I see that 80% drop down to between 30 and 40%. So self-assessments are really, the weight and trustworthy of them really depends on the quality and level of expertise that you have in-house. On the independent third party, performed by a company or resource external to the organization, and control on the pro side, controls are validated by a qualified expert, and they're independent and absent from any bias. They didn't implement it. They don't have to defend it. They're not worried that somebody's going to say it's substandard. So an external party is doing it without bias. And strong confidence in the findings that are documented because of all those things that I said. On the con side, it will come in at a higher risk, obviously. And one of the things that we do recommend where you're going out using an independent third party is make sure that they're not just selling that they're experts. Make sure that they are. Make sure the resources that they commit to doing the job are trained and certified in ISO 27001. And interviewing them, knowing a bit more about how much experience they have in doing this really wouldn't hurt either. So now we're going to talk a little bit about the different types of tools that you might use, conventional or manual tools, or there's also on the other side, we have the automated tools as well. So what you see on the left is kind of a snapshot of or an excerpt from a spreadsheet, which a lot of organizations historically have used. And on the right side, this is a snapshot or a screen capture of an automated tool that you might have. So we're going to talk a little bit more about kind of the differences in the same format that we used just a minute ago. So on the conventional or manual side, so the type is control-based test procedures in Word documents, consolidated based in Excel spreadsheets, if you will. On the pros, very low cost, easy customizability with advanced skills, can be partially automated. So in a spreadsheet, for example, a little VB scripting, if you have 4 or 5 different business units, you can actually have a copy for each business unit. You can put your VB script in there to actually pull all the data to one master spreadsheet, so you have the high-level enterprise view as well. That's always beneficial. On the con side, version control can be challenging, creates a volume of documents that should be inventoried and distribution controlled. So the quality and value of documents are predicated on the expertise of the creators, and mandates you must maintain a license for the software for which the templates are generated. So whether that's Microsoft Word or Excel, if your organization might be looking at going to OpenOffice or something like that, you may want to consider making sure that whatever you create is portable over to another platform. And on the remark side, can quickly become overwhelming to manage all ISMS documentation and audit artifacts, so the records. So then you're going to need a folder and you're going to be dumping them somewhere. Let's talk about the automated. So you can get them in either desktop or a software as a service hosted service. On the pro side is centralized ISMS management. So you get one place where everybody goes and you can manage everything from that one dashboard. Centralized control, audit, evidence storage. So a lot of these tools, you'll just upload it, it gets stored into the database of the application. May have integrated workflow, granular access control of data, and can support external viewing without document sharing. So some of them will allow you to have your auditors and certification auditors peek in and do their work without having to, and especially that was very valuable for organizations during COVID time when, having people on site wasn't the most favorable idea, and supports role-based access features to limit users based on their need to know and the least privilege requirements. So on the con side, there is a higher cost to that for SaaS requirements, extending trust in sensitive risk information external to your organization to a third party. So you're exposing yourself a bit more, and essentially that gets traded off typically with, and you manage that risk through your third-party risk management, one of which a lot of these software companies have gone the route of getting themselves ISO 27001 certified to help that get through that and allow you to have that confidence that much quicker. So here's just a quick general flow of the gap assessment activity. So it's really quite simple. Essentially, we're looking at a particular control, and so we're identifying which control we're going to be testing. We identify, do we have a audit test procedure, as in what are the things that we're going to be looking for, what will we ask for, what will we examine, to help us validate that that control is in fact in place, and we call that a test procedure. And then after we have the test procedure established, we then go to the next thing where we're actually asking the question, is the control in place based on our test procedure? So as we go through that, we will be able to determine whether the control is in place or not. And from there, we then go from the identification of methods to validate, and then we gather the validation evidence. So we're going to, evidence can come in a number of ways. We're not going to try to turn this into an audit presentation. So we go into great detail during the lead auditor course, and we go into some detail in the lead implementer course around this. But for the purpose of this presentation, we're going to keep it at a much higher level and simply say, identification of the methods to validate, gather the validation evidence, and then perform an assessment on it. So the assessment, the evidence might be verbal. You may get it from an interview. It may be documented by way of a process or a policy. And obviously there's going to be certain things that you're going to need to determine whether it's sufficient. And that's where we go down on the bottom right. Is the evidence sufficient for us to say that the control is in place adequately? And then what we do is we document our results as to what our findings are. I've looked at it. I've corroborated this evidence with that evidence. And based on everything that I've seen, I've determined that it's compliant. So then what we end up doing is, after we go through all these, we collate individual control results, and then we make a determination on the organization as to whether it's, what is its compliant state? Is it compliant or is it not? And now that we've done the gap assessment, we kind of go to the next stage, which is the impact assessment. And that is a systematic approach for the identification and qualification of what it would take to move a control from a non-compliant to a compliant state. As simple as that. And as you can see from the diagram, we do consider people, process, and technology as it relates to that. We're not going to go into the details of kind of the step-by-step kind of how you do that. Suffice to know, when we do it in our consulting practice, we do have our own deep thoughts in this, especially once we get in on the technology side. But these are some of the things that you're going to want to figure out for yourself. What are the steps? How do I know? What do I have to consider? These are all the things that you're going to want to kind of plan out as you go into those. So on some considerations as you're doing that, who will build and manage a process? So am I going to use internal or external? Am I going to go get a consultant to help us with this? And some of these other questions will kind of help determine that. So who will implement, manage, and maintain the technology, leveraging internal or external expertise? Sustaining support requirements after it's implemented. Who's going to maintain it? So there's got to be an owner. It's got to be handed off from project to an operational owner. It's an ISO requirement. And then the question is, do I hire or do I outsource? So on the process side, we're thinking about the skill level required to build and maintain. So you can see some interconnectivity between some of this stuff as well with the people stuff as well. Stakeholder communications and training. interdependency, processes and resources, and manual or automated management. So just going back to the second one, communications and training with stakeholders. So one of the things that comes to mind is risk management. So you have a risk management expert develop the process, and then you tell everybody the business owner is the owner of the risk that is qualified, and there are certain obligations of different parties, including the data owner or the business owner. And so you can't just expect them to kind of intuitively know something that is not part of their core expertise. So in order to get everybody into the game and the process happening correctly, you want to make sure that you include your stakeholders in some training. And for those that just need to know about it, make sure it's, you send out communications to all those that are relevant. On the technology side, there's software and hardware requirements. A lot of people might forget, I'm only buying software. Why do I need hardware? Well, it's got to sit on a server, unless you're going to put it in the cloud, so we could then say hardware or cloud requirements. Build versus buy, compliance with internal standards, and maintenance costs. So we've talked about the gap assessment. We've talked about the impact assessment. Now we kind of know what we're missing. We know what it's going to take to put that into operation. We got a whole bunch of controls that are absent, and we got a bunch of little mini plans on what we're going to buy, some of the consultants that we're going to need to write processes, some of the people inside that are going to be doing some stuff. So we get a whole bunch of information, but it's kind of very segmented. So the goal now is to take it and put it together in a mitigation plan, which is a risk-based approach to collectively organize and manage an agreed upon approach to migrate an organization from a non-compliant state to a fully compliant one with the ISO 27001 controls, including those identified during the legal and regulatory review mandated under the standard. And then we kind of move over and look at some of the mitigation plan development process flow. So how are we developing our mitigation plan? So we're not going to go through the different steps again. It's one of those things that you need to know that it's good to plan it and know how the steps that you're going to go through. This is just one of those examples that we use. It's important to note that the mitigation activity is preceded by initial ISMS development activity, gap assessment, impact assessment, and starts with the first control that is in a non-compliant state, and then the steps are repeated through each subsequent step, and then we collate and consolidate projects into a program plan, and then generate a narrative plan document. Or you can take a more tactical approach with the creation of a program Gantt chart and view. Having said that, most organizations do both. They create a Gantt chart for ongoing tracking and managing, but for leadership and others' consumption, they build a more detailed narrative, which will incorporate the Gantt chart into it. So that ends our second session in this ISO 27001 webinar series. I'd like to thank you for taking the time to share with me to go through this, and we hope to see you again during the third session, where we're going to each one we kind of go a little bit deeper. And in session 3, we're going to be going through developing an ISMS business case. So now we're finished the mitigation plan, and part of what we have to do is build a business case that we take it to the leadership for approval. So we're going to talk all about that during session 3. Thank you, and have yourselves a blessed day.